This is the final video in this lecture, so congratulations, you made it. And I'm going to be talking to you about some cool Excel shortcuts that I think you'll find useful no matter what context you use spreadsheets in. And just go over some logistical stuff and talk about how we're working on making this class more effective given the virtual transition we've had over the past 2 weeks. So before we delve into the shortcuts though, I do want to start with some logistical announcements. So assignments for this week. Our lab for this week is going to be on Data Camp. It's Intro to Spreadsheets Chapter 1 and 2. It's due next Sunday at midnight, like most of our labs are. They due Sunday midnight. So we're going to continue with that cycle. The first module of Project 1 is due on Friday, the 10th of April. Again, the project counts for half of your grade, and this module counts for 20% of the project. So please do give this the time of day it deserves. We have a lot of officers lined up for you throughout the course of the week to give you all the help that you need. So we encourage you to get into those officers and basically discuss your project with one of our TAs or one of us, and really get any queries, concerns, or questions you have answered. Quiz is going to be released this Friday. It's going to be due next Monday before lecture. Again, really short quiz, 2 to 3 questions. Nothing fancy. And also, now to get attendance credit for this lecture, please fill out this form with the code word before next Monday's lecture. And for those of you all who haven't been looking at the Piazza posts, we moved on to like a code word system to gauge attendance for our lectures. So randomly one of these videos you'll have a 20-second portion where we tell you a code word for a lecture, and you basically fill that code word out in the Google form to get attendance credit. And basically that's our mechanism to actually ensure you're watching the videos or not. So do get that done when you can. Now that we're done with logistical stuff, I think we can move on to actual spreadsheet work. Yes, exciting. So let's before I start with the shortcuts, one thing I did want to tell you is that I have made a small change to the data set. I've added 2 columns that basically represent the average customer rating and the average critic rating for each of these restaurants. And whoops, this looks a little weird. Let me just clear this up. But yeah, I do have 2 more columns now. Give me one moment to clear this up. Perfect. So we have 2 more rows, average customer rating and average critic rating. And I just added these to demo something I wanted to demo in the future, but do keep note that this is not actual data. This rating does not correspond to this restaurant in any way. These are just random values I came up with to illustrate a concept I really wanted to talk about. So without further ado, let's move on to our first shortcut. Before I start though, one thing I just wanted to recap is that in Excel, copying is Command C and pasting is Command V. So anytime you want to copy paste a value or a reference or anything like that, if you want to copy this column, you Command C, Command V, it's copied right over. So just keep a note of that. Let me remove that. And the first shortcut I wanted to really talk about was using the command key to select non-contiguous data. So we talked about how if we want to maybe copy these 2 columns, you can do simple command or control C and paste these over right there, and they paste perfectly fine. What if you want to say copy data that is not close or adjacent to each other? What if you wanted to copy the latitude column and the phone number column, for example? How would you go about doing that? Because you'd have to, the longitude column comes in between, right? So there's no way of copying just these 2 other than maybe just separately copying this and separately copying the phone number column, which seems fast enough. But once you get into copying several columns, it becomes a lot slower. So Excel actually has this really cool shortcut built in for this, where you can just press the command button to select all the columns or any data points you want, and they can be non-contiguous, but they'll still select. So what I mean by that is you can just press command, select the latitude column, keep command pressed, select the phone number column this time, and you can see we've selected these two without any problems. This wouldn't have happened if I didn't have the command key pressed. Now I can just copy like I would any normal. Let me do that again. Now I can just copy like I would any adjacent data points and paste the exact same way, and that happens. So that's a really cool feature that I use a lot and has saved me a lot of time over whatever time I started using spreadsheet software. So, and now the second shortcut I really wanted to teach you was basically the command shift down shortcut that helps you reach the end of a data set. So say you want to find out how many data points we have in this entire data set. You can go all the way down and you'll eventually find out that this data set has about 697 data points. But with larger data sets, this will take even longer. This seemed to be inconvenient enough. So what you can actually do is click on any cell and press command or control if you're on a Windows system, shift with the down arrow, and this takes you to basically the last filled data point on the spreadsheet. So because I selected an entry in the B column, this took me to the last viable entry in the B column. And you can see that the last row seems to come about at number 697, and we can make an inference that this is probably this data set has 697 minus 1, 696 rows. So again, really useful shortcut. Another shortcut I wanted to talk about was basically pasting values and not references. We talked about the difference between references and values in one previous video. I really wanted to sort of reinforce that concept and also talk about the difference in nuance between pasting values versus pasting references. So for those purposes, I'll create a sum column, and I basically want this to be the sum of the customer rating and the critic rating. So let's just call this sum average critic or sum customer critic rather. And I want this to be this row value added to this row value. And I want to do that for every basically row in this data set. So for this cell, I want this to be added to this. For this cell, I want this to be added to this. And since we want this dynamic column name changing, row name changing rather, I can just actually, Excel has this really cool shortcut where if you have a formula and you want to dynamically apply it to an entire column with your row indices changing, you can just double click this tiny box you see in the bottom right corner and it does that for you. Really cool, isn't it? Saved you so much time. Otherwise you'd have to maybe drag this around all the way to row 696, but then you don't have to do that anymore. You can just double click and everything's taken care of. But notice, even though this cell evaluates to 12, its value on the toolbar over here is not 12, as opposed to this, which has evaluates to 5 and has a toolbar value of 5 as well. So when I conventionally use copy paste and try to paste values, what I paste instead are the references in the toolbar and not the absolute value themselves. So when I copy this using command C and do a command V, I basically paste these references, except because Excel is dynamic, it shifts these letters by 1, because this cell number is 1 to the right of this cell number, so its references shift by 1 to the right as well, if that makes sense. So an L2 and an M2 changes to a M2 and an N2. Similarly, because you're going down over here, a M2 and an N2 change to a M3 and an N3. So you have this dynamic shifting that's happening, but either way copying references and not values. What if you instead wanted to just have a hard copy of all these values and not a copy of these references? What would you do? So really simple solution. Instead of using a conventional paste, which is a command V, all you need to do is copy and use a value paste, which is a command shift V, and you'll get the exact same values. And you can solve that problem just like that by adding an extra shift when you're pasting. So again, really simple, elegant solution, and another feature that I use a lot because sometimes you really don't want to copy references, you want to copy the absolute values. So yes, we are done with our third shortcut. Two more to go, I think, or one more to go rather. Or two more actually, yeah. So another thing I wanted to teach you about was basically creating a random sample of size n, and this is a personal favorite of mine. So what if you have a lot of data points, and you want to create a random sample of size n, for example. Let's take n to be 40. What you can actually do over here is really cool. So the way I do that in Excel is first create a dummy column. Let's call it random sampler. And to each row here, I would assign a random number between, let's just do 1 and the number of rows. We talked about how the number of rows is 696, so we'll just do 696. And what this function does is basically generates a random number between the two bounds you specified. So the two arguments this function takes are a lower bound and an upper bound. Thing to note here is that these bounds are inclusive, so you can, this function call can still evaluate to 1 or 696, just nothing less or nothing more than 696 or nothing less than 1, but any integer between is still fair game. So this should evaluate to something between 1 and 696, and that happens. Now what I want to do is I want to apply this to every row in our data set. We learned about a shortcut for that, and that's just clicking this 2 times. I want to basically have these values hard coded, no references. So now this does not evaluate to rand between, but rather has the hard coded value 299 instead. There is no rand between over here. And now what I want to do, and this is where the really smart part comes in, is I basically want to sort this using oh sorry, yeah, what I want to do is sort this column from Z to A. You see our highest value is 695, and what you then want to do to create your sample is basically take your top 40 rows. So let's go from 2 to 41 if you want to generate a random sample of 2 to 41 maybe, and maybe generate a new sheet. Let's call it random sample, and paste that data. You have a random sample of 40 rows. The reason you can't just take the first 40 rows you encountered initially is because there might be some element of non-randomization to the initial order the dataset was arranged in. Maybe it was by business ID or something else, but that assumption is simply too big to make. So in order to add another element of randomization and make sure that you're sampling randomly, what we're basically doing is creating another dummy column, assigning a random number between 1 and 696 to each column, and then essentially sorting so that we get the top 40 rows to be assigned randomly, because you did not know which row was going to be assigned the highest number. That has happened completely randomly. So this is basically the equivalent of randomly sampling 40 rows without replacement from this master dataset. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, a feature I've used a lot and is really ingenious, the way you can just create a dummy column, use a combination of predefined Excel functions to create a completely new process, which in this case is random sampling. So again, one of my favorite features. I'm just going to delete this column just to reduce the clutter. And the last feature we're going to be talking about, the last shortcut rather, we're going to be talking about today is filtering. So we talked about filtering in pandas a lot, and pandas filtering was a really steep learning curve, wasn't it? Because you had so much syntax, so many braces to worry about, so many syntax errors. I have good news for you. Filtering in spreadsheets is easier by a factor of 10 at least. And all you have to do is basically click this icon over here, create something called a new filter view, name the filter view whatever you want to. So maybe I want to filter by restaurants that have an average customer rating of less than 8. So let's call this less than 8. And what you want to do then is, because you want customer rating to be the thing you filter on, you want to click this icon over here. Every column, as you can probably see, has this icon because you can filter on any of these columns. This should give you a list of basically viable values in this filter. Since we want only values lesser than 8 to be viable, I'm just going to deselect 8, 9 and 10. Press OK, and now you only have restaurant entries that follow that criteria of your average customer rating being lesser than 8. You can see we've skipped a few rows here because this skips from 1, 2 to 4. So row number 3, we can infer had a average customer restaurant rating of greater than 8. And the cool thing about this is you can save these filters. So if you want the filter to go away, you can just go back to none, and this gives you the original data set. If you want the filter data where ratings filtered by customer rating back again, just click on customer rating less than 8. That's a filter you've saved already, and you get that back. Very, very cool feature to have, so intuitive and so much easier than pandas. You can also have multiple conditions. So since this filter already takes into account the customer rating condition, we can also have another condition that maybe you also want the sum of your rating to be less than 16, for example, or less than 15, let's do. So we remove 16, 17 and 15 as viable values. Now you get a filtered data view that has two conditions, one with the customer rating being lesser than 8 and one with the sum of the customer and critic rating being lesser than 15. And we can just change the name to reflect that. Less than 8 and sum less than 15. Click enter to save that, and our new filter is saved. If you want to go back to the original data set, click none, it's all gone. So really cool filter to have again. So I think that was the last cool trick I had lined up for you. Before I bid adieu, I do want to say though, if you haven't seen a Big Piazza post, do check out our website. We just released it a couple of days ago. It's really useful. A large issue we were having as we were transitioning into the virtual phase of this course was communication and like having a centralized resource for everything we've covered so far. This website solves that problem. We have slides for every lecture, the relevant assignments for every lecture, attendance forms for the online portion of this class, deadlines, and a section with something about the teaching stuff, and also a look into what we have lined up in future lectures for you. So really useful resource. Please do check it out. It has our office hours calendar as well if you want to figure out which office hours slot you want to attend. But like I said, really useful resource, and hopefully this solves a problem we were having as a class. So please do check it out. On that note though, this is the end of the spreadsheets lecture. Thank you so much for joining us, and please stay at home, stay safe, and take care of yourselves. Goodbye.